All right, so buckle up for this deep dive. We're heading down to Chile for this one. It's a story about, well, a public servant who hasn't shown up for work in like 3 years? 3 years?
Yeah, and he's still getting paid.
Yeah.
Even got a couple of raises, too.
I know, right? It's kind of mind-blowing. So naturally, it's stirred up a lot of attention down there. People are asking some tough questions about labor laws and how unions work.
It definitely makes you wonder, are things working the way they should?
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to taxpayer money.
Exactly. We're going to dive into this whole thing using an interview from this Chilean YouTube channel, La Mano Invisibly.
It's a popular one.
Yeah. They got the public servant himself, Felipe Ramirez, to sit down for an interview, and, well, let's just say the interviewer didn't hold back.
He really puts Felipe's feet to the fire, trying to get him to explain how this is even possible.
So, let's start with the basics. Who is this guy? Felipe Ramirez, he's a social worker. Got hired back in 2021 by Unionist, which is basically Chile's child protection services.
Right, but here's the catch. He hasn't been seen at work since the day he was hired.
Not even once.
Okay, so what's his excuse?
Well, he claims he's got this special status because he's a big-time union leader, like on a national level. He says the law allows him to spend all his time on union stuff.
That's where things get interesting. I mean, Chilean labor law does protect union leaders from getting fired, and they can spend time on union work, but years.
Right. Did anyone think that someone could just, like, never show up?
Felipe's argument is that he's working super hard for the union, traveling all over Chile to stand up for vulnerable kids and workers. He's saying he's always on call, answering emails and messages, even late at night.
Yeah, and he goes even further, saying if the union work is, like, the key to fixing what's wrong with Unionist itself. He claims it's a mess, understaffed, poorly organized.
But the interviewer isn't buying it, and neither are most Chileans, judging by the comments and everything. It sparks some serious public anger. People see it as a blatant misuse of their tax money. I mean, you're paying for his service, and the guy who's supposed to be providing it is nowhere to be found.
And get this, to make things even worse, he got 2 pay raises during those 3 years of, not working.
It's crazy, right?
Hey.
Felipe says it's because of this policy they have to even out salaries between people from the old Child Protection Agency and the new hires at Unionist.
So it's like this weird loophole. A policy meant to be fair ends up benefiting someone who's not even doing the job.
It definitely adds to the whole perception of unfairness and makes people even angrier.
And then there's the question of his coworkers. The interview mentions that the investigation into Felipe started because of an anonymous tip. You gotta wonder if that came from someone at Unionist who's stuck covering his workload.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine? You're already swamped with your own cases, and then you have to pick up the slack for someone who's constantly MIA.
It really makes you think about the impact this has on the people actually working at Unionist, the ones trying to do their jobs and help these kids.
It's definitely not just an abstract debate about laws. This is real life, with real consequences for real people.
Exactly. So we've got this clash between Felipe's insistence that he's working hard for the union and the public's outrage over what they see as a guy taking advantage of the system. But there's a deeper layer here, right? This tension between unions and the general public.
You picked that up in the interview for sure. The interviewer is pretty skeptical of all this talk about union activities. It hints at this wider feeling that maybe unions have gotten too powerful, that they're actually holding the country back.
All right, so before we jump to conclusions, let's really break down what Felipe is saying. He claims he has to travel all over Chile for his union work and that this is, like, essential.
Yeah, he really emphasizes that. He's not just goofing off. He's constantly on the move, fighting for workers' rights.
It's almost like he sees it as a calling, something that goes way beyond a regular 9-to-5 job.
And here's where we have to bring in the idea of syndicalism. It's this whole philosophy of unionism that's deeply ingrained in Chilean culture. It's all about worker control, direct action, really taking charge.
So Felipe's argument is rooted in this particular brand of unionism. He sees his role as like a crusader fighting for the rights of the working class.
Right, and for him that means constant travel, constant advocacy. He really believes this is the best way to make a difference, both for the workers and for the kids that Unionist is supposed to be helping.
So it's not just that he's trying to get away with something. He actually believes in what he's doing, even if it seems, well, pretty out there to a lot of people.
It's crucial to understand that context. He's not just lazy or trying to cheat the system. He truly believes he's fulfilling his duty as a union leader. The question is, does that align with how Chilean law is supposed to work? And does it match what the public expects from a public servant?
Okay, so we've got Felipe's perspective, we've got the Chilean labor landscape, and we've got this brewing public anger. Now let's dive into his specific arguments and see if they hold water.
Yeah, let's get into the nitty-gritty. So one of Felipe's main arguments is that to be an effective union leader, he has to travel all over Chile. But the interviewer really pushes back on that, saying a lot of what Felipe does could be done remotely. Video calls, emails, all that.
Yeah, makes sense in this day and age, right? And he could maybe delegate some tasks to other union people in those different regions.
Exactly. The interviewer is basically saying, like, come on, dude, it's not the 1950s anymore.
It raises the question, too, of whether he's being efficient with his time. I mean, could he get more done if he wasn't always on the road and still fulfill his union duties?
That's a good question. And it all ties back to the idea that he's getting paid for this, right?
Yeah.
Taxpayer money.
The interviewer keeps bringing that up, too. He's like, look, you're a social worker. You're supposed to be helping these vulnerable kids, but you're never even in the office.
There's a real irony there, for sure.
Yeah.
And the interviewer doesn't let Felipe forget it.
It's that disconnect that's making people so angry. Like, you're taking money for a job you're not doing, and the people who need you are the ones suffering.
Absolutely. And then you add in the pay raises, and it just pours salt on the wound.
He keeps justifying it by saying, oh, it's this policy we have, but it doesn't really fly, does it?
Not really. I mean, the policy was probably meant to be fair, to make sure everyone's getting paid equally, but it clearly wasn't designed for a situation like Felipe's.
Yeah, like a guy who never shows up.
It's a classic example of unintended consequences, right? And the Chilean lawmakers might want to rethink that policy. Maybe add some clarification so this doesn't happen again.
This whole thing really shows you how tricky it can be to balance workers' rights with, just basic common sense and responsibility.
For sure. It's like, how do you protect workers and give unions power without letting things get out of hand?
And how do you make sure public money is being used wisely?
Big questions.
Yeah.
And then there's that anonymous tip that started the investigation.
Oh, yeah. We can't forget about that. Someone at Unionist ratted him out.
It really makes you wonder what it's like to work there. I mean, imagine being Felipe's colleague, trying to do your job, knowing that he's off doing who knows what, while you're stuck with his work on top of yours.
Yeah, it would be infuriating. I bet people are burnt out and resentful. And who suffers in the end? The kids, right?
It's a total mess. And it shows how Felipe's actions aren't just affecting him. They're impacting everyone around him.
This is why this deep dive is so important, right? It's not just about some legal technicalities. It's about the real-world impact this is having on vulnerable children and the people trying to help them.
Absolutely. So we've talked about the legal stuff, the impact on Felipe's coworkers. But let's not forget the children, right? The whole reason major unions exist is to protect these kids.
Right. So how does Felipe justify his absence when you look at it from that perspective?
Well, he claims that his union work is indirectly helping these kids by fighting for better working conditions, more resources, systemic change. But the interviewer pushes back hard on that.
Like he's saying, shouldn't you be here on the ground actually working with these kids and families?
Exactly. The interviewer's point is that being physically present, working directly with those who need help, that's what really matters.
It's like Felipe is focused on the big picture, the political stuff, while neglecting the day-to-day reality of these kids' lives.
And that's what's rubbing people the wrong way. It feels like he's prioritizing his own ambitions over the needs of the very people he's supposed to be serving.
And then he says this thing about his assigned region not being conflictive enough, so he doesn't need to be there.
Oof, yeah. That was a bad look. Basically admitting that he's choosing to focus on regions where there's more drama, more opportunities to make a name for himself as a union leader.
It really makes you question his motives, doesn't it? It's like he's more interested in being a union big shot than actually helping vulnerable kids.
It definitely reinforces that perception, for sure.
And it makes you wonder if his union work is really that effective. I mean, if he's just going to places that are already highly unionized, is he really making a difference?
Maybe he'd have a bigger impact if he focused on regions where workers are more vulnerable, less organized.
It's a good point. This whole situation really raises questions about how unions operate in today's world.
Yeah, like with technology and globalization, the traditional model of syndicalism might need an update, right?
It's about finding that balance between protecting workers and making sure unions are actually serving the needs of the broader society.
Absolutely. So we've got the legal stuff, we've got the impact on Felipe's colleagues, the kids, but we haven't even touched on the public reaction, which has been huge.
People are furious, right? It's all over social media.
Yeah, Chileans are seeing this as a slap in the face. Like, we're working hard, paying our taxes, This guy's living the good life on our dime.
The interviewer definitely plays up that angle, reminding Felipe over and over that he's a public servant, that he's accountable to the people. It's a powerful message.
It really shifts the focus from Felipe's rights to his responsibilities, which is a key part of this whole debate.
It's like, okay, you have these rights as a union leader, but what about your duties to the public?
It gets even deeper than that, though Felipe's case has become a symbol of everything people hate about the system. Wasteful spending, bureaucracy, a sense that the government is out of touch.
Yeah, like those in power don't care about us regular folks.
And the comments on the video are brutal. People are calling him a parasite, a leech, saying he's a disgrace to social workers everywhere.
It really shows how powerful social media can be, right? It's given a voice to the public's anger in a way that wasn't possible before.
Absolutely. It's forcing the government and the unions to pay attention.
It's bigger than just Felipe now. It sparked this national conversation about unions, about the role of public servants, about transparency and accountability.
And even though Felipe is at the center of the storm, his case is really just one example of a much bigger issue.
So, okay, we've covered the legal stuff, the impact on Felipe's colleagues, the kids, the public reaction. What else do we need to understand to fully grasp this whole situation?
Well, we need to zoom out a bit. Look at the bigger picture in Chile, the societal context.
What do you mean?
Chile has gone through some major changes in the past few decades, right? From dictatorship to democracy, the economy's booming, but not everyone's benefiting equally.
Right. There's still a lot of inequality, a lot of people struggling.
So there's this underlying tension, this feeling that the system isn't working for everyone.
Yeah.
And Felipe's case just throws gasoline on that fire.
It's like he's become the poster boy for everything people hate about the elite, the connected, the people who seem to get away with everything.
Exactly. It's not just about what he did, it's about what it represents, you know?
I wonder how this whole thing would play out in a different country, with different laws, different attitudes towards unions.
That's a fascinating question, right? This idea of syndicalism. It's so specific to Chile. In another country, people might just be baffled by Felipe's whole argument.
It shows how important it is to understand the cultural context when you're looking at a story like this.
It's not just about right and wrong. There are all these historical factors, these cultural norms that shape how people see things.
So, wrapping up, what are the key takeaways for our listener? What should they be thinking about after this deep dive?
Well, first of all, this isn't just about one guy trying to game the system. It's about a much deeper conflict, this tension between workers' rights and the public good.
And how those two things can sometimes clash, especially in a rapidly changing world.
Exactly. And it also shows that even in a democracy, things aren't always black and white. There are gray areas, there are loopholes, and there's always going to be debate about what's fair.
And it's up to all of us to stay informed, to engage in these debates, and to hold our leaders accountable.
It really feels like Chile's at a crossroads, doesn't it? All these changes happening, and then boom, this Felipe thing blows up, and suddenly everyone's talking about these deeper issues.
It's like he's become this, symbol of everything that's wrong with the system.
Right. Like people are working hard, struggling to make ends meet, paying their taxes, and then they see this guy getting a paycheck for doing nothing. It's infuriating.
The interviewer really nails that, He keeps hammering home the point that Felipe is a public servant, that he's supposed to be serving the people, not himself.
It's a smart strategy. He's appealing to people's sense of fairness, of justice.
And it really highlights the tension between Felipe's defense, this whole syndicalism thing, and the public's expectation that public servants should actually, serve the public.
It's like two different worlds colliding. Syndicalism has this long history in Chile. It's been really important for workers' rights. But in this case, it's clashing with people's basic sense of right and wrong.
So is this the end of syndicalism in Chile? Is this whole thing going to force them to rethink how unions work?
It's hard to say, but it's definitely a wake-up call. I mean, unions have to adapt to the times, right? The world's changing, the way we work is changing, and unions need to keep up.
So what happens to Felipe now? What are the consequences going to be?
It's tough to predict. The public pressure is huge, though. I mean, the interview's gone viral. Everyone's talking about it. People are demanding action.
Yeah, I can't imagine he's going to just get away with this. There has to be some kind of accountability.
But here's the thing. Even with all this backlash, Felipe's not backing down. He's sticking to his story, saying he's done nothing wrong, that his union work is vital.
It's like he's completely in his own bubble.
Right. Like, he doesn't understand, or maybe doesn't care, how much damage this has done. Not just to his own reputation, but to people's trust in the whole system.
So has he just completely miscalculated?
It's possible. Or maybe he's so convinced of his own righteousness that he can't see the bigger picture.
Whatever it is, it's clear that this case is going to have a lasting impact. It's already sparked a national debate about labor laws, about the role of unions, about what it means to be a public servant in Chile.
It's like this one case has opened up a Pandora's box of issues that Chile's been grappling with for years.
And we started this whole deep dive talking about how this story captured the public's imagination. And it's certainly done that, right? It's become way bigger than just one guy.
It's about this fundamental question of fairness, of accountability. It's about the anxieties people have about the future, about whether the system is rigged against them.
And it's about the role of unions in a changing world.
So where does Chile go from here? What happens next?
Yeah, what are the ripple effects going to be?
I wish I had a crystal ball. But one thing's for sure, this conversation isn't going away. People are demanding change, and the government's going to have to respond.
I wonder if Felipe regrets anything. I mean, did he think it would blow up like this?
Who knows what's going on in his head? But regardless, this whole thing has become a defining moment for Chilean labor relations.
It's a reminder that even in a democracy, things aren't always simple. There are always going to be these gray areas, these tensions, these competing interests.
And it's up to all of us to stay informed, to engage in these debates, and to fight for a more just and equitable society.
This has been a wild ride, hasn't it? I mean, who knew a story about a guy not showing up for work could lead to all this?
It just shows you there's always more to the story than meets the eye.
Exactly. So we encourage all of you listening to keep digging, keep asking questions, keep the conversation going.
Because in the end, it's up to all of us to shape the future we want to see.
That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.